Welcome to Community Forum. My name is John Guglieltino and I'm your host. This evening we're talking to the Executive Director of Connecticut Legal Rights Project. This is Janet Van Tassel, right? Did I get it right? Esquire. And we're going to be talking about what's available to Connecticut citizens, and I guess we'll get into it. Before we get into questions, I want to welcome you on the show. And before we get into questions, if you can tell us a little bit about your background as to how you came, how long you've been in Connecticut, if you were born here, and that kind of thing, and how you got into the project, or how before what you did maybe prior to getting to the project.
Well, actually, I was raised outside of Boston, and for those who don't like it, I'm a Red Sox fan. But and I actually came to Connecticut via Idaho when I got out of law school. I went to Idaho as a VISTA volunteer and ended up being offered a position here in Connecticut after that with Legal Services. I was working with Legal Services for, I don't know, about 15 years or so, and a colleague contacted me about Connecticut Legal Rights because he was leaving. He was the director, and asked me if I'd be interested in working here. So I've always wanted to do public interest work, and that's what I've done my whole career, and this is just one more element of that.
So you were in the public or semi-public, you never really were a private
No, I've done some work in private practice when I was in law school, did some public defender work, but public interest is really my passion.
Right, so that's how we got here. Okay, very good. Now, what is the Connecticut Legal Rights Project?
The Connecticut Legal Rights Project is a statewide nonprofit agency that provides free legal services for adults with psychiatric disabilities on matters related to their treatment and civil rights.
Okay. So it's statewide. Do you have offices around the state, or are they?
We do.
Okay.
Our main office is actually located at Connecticut Valley Hospital in Middletown, but my staff of attorney and paralegals actually are located at state facilities and nonprofits throughout the state.
Okay. So how many people work exactly?
Well, we have 20 people. We have 6 attorneys, including myself and the legal director, and then we have 11 paralegals and some administrative staff.
Okay. Okay, where is the Western region?
Well, we have staff. We have a paralegal, and all of our paralegals are supervised by attorneys. So we have a paralegal who will work at the Western Connecticut Mental Health Network here in Danbury.
Oh, okay.
She also covers Waterbury, and she spends time up in Primetime House in Torrington as well.
Okay. Now, how's this all funded? Is it government grants, federal and state?
Well, it's a combination.
Okay.
We actually, our program was created as a result of a lawsuit that the Civil Liberties Union filed against the state actually about 20 years ago. And because of the lack of access to legal services for people in state psychiatric facilities. As a result of that, the state was obligated to give us some core funding for representing people who are at the inpatient facilities. We also get some funding from private foundations to represent people with psychiatric disabilities in the community as well.
Okay. So in other words, in addition to maybe some federal or state, there's also
state and private foundation.
You're also fundraising. You're doing fundraising. Okay.
Right.
All right. What kind of cases do you accept? To be more specific.
Well, as I said at the outset, one of the things that's critical is we represent people on matters related to their treatment and their civil rights. Right. We don't take just any matter just because it happens to affect a person with a psychiatric disability. So that actually includes a broad range of issues. It sounds narrow, but there are both state and federal Patients' Bill of Rights that influence people's rights during receiving treatment, both inpatient and outpatient. As many people know, there's the Americans with Disabilities Act, which influences the amount of access to care, the right to community integration, things like that. And there are also federal and state regulations that have to do with your rights in receiving treatment. So it's actually pretty broad.
Can you give any examples of something without mentioning a name,
sure.
obviously? What what type of violation of rights could happen on, let's say, at the state level?
Well, on an inpatient level, a number of the issues that we deal with have to do with the use of restraints and seclusion.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah, restraints and seclusion can oftentimes, I was surprised, I have to say, when I first came to this position. I didn't have a background in mental health system, and I guess for some reason I thought these things didn't happen anymore. They do happen.
Yeah, it was like something we stopped doing in 1920.
Right.
Okay.
The snake pit or something. But there are occasions when, in an extreme emergency, they use restraints. But what we have found in some situations, they either have not used the appropriate interventions beforehand to try and avoid the use of the restraints, or we find that the restraints are used for too long a period of time because under state and federal regulations, they only are allowed to be used until the person is stabilized. And we have filed grievances, filed complaints with the federal government, and actually had the feds come in and do a whole review of the use of restraints at CVH. I should note, however, for the record, that some of that was about 5 or 6 years ago, and the state of Connecticut has actually done a very good job of implementing new policies and reducing the use of restraints.
So, you know,
maybe not as much as I'd like.
So a new policy is put in. This is what you're supposed to do, and that things have improved.
And actually, that's one of the things we try to do, is take cases where we're going to be able to help an individual, but also be able to hopefully change the system for the better for everybody who's being treated by the system. So that's a very good example of a situation where we're able to accomplish that.
Right. Now, what does community integration mean?
Well, community integration is actually a mandate under the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Right.
And essentially, under a decision, what's called the Olmstead decision in 1999, 10 years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court held that unnecessarily hospitalizing someone, institutionalizing them, and segregating them is in and of itself discrimination. And under the ADA, people are to receive services in the most integrated setting that they can. And that's one of the issues in terms of the people staying in a hospital longer than necessary. So it's getting people out and interacting with other people.
Yeah. Doesn't that affect hospitals? You know, where we had hospitals, specific hospitals. Right. Yeah.
Well, that was one of the things, along with the development of medications, too, that really was an impetus for the closing of some of the large state hospitals. Right. As you know, Fairfield Hills in this region.
Because that was a 19th century approach that was still going on, and then all of these new studies and new medications basically made it so there wasn't...
Well, that was the hope.
Was in a way, yeah.
Unfortunately, we don't have enough housing and community services, but that definitely has been, studies have shown over and over again that you reach a point in the hospital after you're stabilized and improved where you can actually decline, like any of us. If you stay somewhere for too long a period of time and you're not benefiting from them, you can actually regress.
Right. Now, housing, why is there, you mentioned we have a problem with housing. Mm-hmm. What are some of the reasons why there isn't enough? Is it like a community block? Is it a combination of there's not enough financing and community of not in my backyard? Or is there a combination of those? Or?
There's actually a lot of reasons, as probably the viewers know. Connecticut's housing is expensive. Anyway, we have a higher cost of housing than a lot of other states. But one of the problems is when, as we were talking about, 2 large state hospitals closed, the money that was saved when those hospitals was closed didn't all go into housing and community services. It's something that happens quite often.
It went into the general fund someplace, right, people forgot about it.
Exactly. And so one of the problems has been that there was a promise that they would create the housing and community services. That didn't happen. So we found ourselves with a gap. And what the state has done is had to play catch-up, and they just are far behind the housing need in the state.
Now, don't most people with mental illnesses need supervision, or at least in the beginning? If you close the hospitals, then where do they get?
Well, we by no means are suggesting that we can do without state hospitals. But what we are saying is that there are too many people right now, and by the way, the Commissioner of the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services agrees, there are people in state hospitals right now who don't need a hospital level of care. That's costing taxpayers $1,200 a day, when there are far more cost-effective community-based settings that would better serve that person's needs. Some people need some supervision. The amount of supervision depends on the person. Some people could go directly from a state hospital to an apartment with some services to support them in that. In fact, supportive housing, which is a permanent apartment for the person along with supportive services, and costs $54 a day compared to that $1,200 a day, has actually been shown to reduce the cycle of hospitalization. A lot of people get out of the hospital, they don't have the right services, they end up going to the ER, back into the hospital. That costs taxpayers a lot of money. It isn't doing the person any good either. With supportive housing, it's been shown that once that person has that housing, the outcomes are far better, and people actually, it saves the taxpayers dollars, people get engaged in education and employment, and interestingly, because you mentioned NIMBY, it actually contributes to higher property values in that area. Where supportive housing is located, they've seen an average increase of 34% in the property values in that neighborhood.
Is there any correlation between a wealthier community and taking care of these problems, or is it, do you know, have you ever done a geographical study on that?
Actually, I don't know. We do have supportive housing in, I'm trying to think of the exact number, I want to say somewhere between 50 and 60 communities in the state. It is not
169 towns,
right.
Yeah.
But the thing is that it's in a whole lot of areas, and it's not a particular model. It may be a single-family house, three-family house. It may be a larger 30 or 40-unit place. They vary, and they fit into the neighborhood. So it isn't something that's going to stand out or get attention.
Okay. What is the role exactly? What do you? How do you get engaged in the process of
getting clients?
Let's say there's a problem on the west side of town or something, and do they contact you to say, "Hey, we got a problem here," or do you get referrals from
Actually,
people?
It's a variety of ways.
Oh, okay.
My staff go out and do presentations on a regular basis so people know about their rights, have a clue when to call us, because a lot of people don't even realize if their rights are being violated. A lot of the providers will call us. We do a lot of housing work, and frequently the calls will come from the provider saying that someone is having a problem with a landlord, and can we intervene? So it really varies.
It's usually things like that, or something worse than that even.
Well, in the community, housing is certainly our biggest issue, and sometimes it ranges from pure discrimination, where people are just saying they won't rent, to situations where there's often a misunderstanding, and unfortunately there's still stigma when it comes to mental illness, and people sometimes are frightened of what they don't know, and they don't know what to expect. So even though people with mental illness are actually far more likely to be a victim of a crime than to commit a crime, people don't know that.
Well, you know, it's like too many Hitchcock movies or whatever. You know, that they've all got a knife and they're all lurking or tiptoeing around and going to do something. It's interesting how the movies and the misconception is passed on to the general population, and then you almost have a panic. Oh, they want to locate one of those homes on the next street over, not in my backyard, and they all turn out if they have to do something with zoning or whatever.
Right? No, you're absolutely right, and it is problematic. We see some changes. The new movie, The Soloist, that's out right now, is something that is, I think, humanizing mental illness, just just as some others more recently have, and more people are willing to come and actually speak out and say, yeah, I have a mental illness. It's no different than having a heart attack or a heart disease or diabetes. I need treatment, and if I take my course of treatment, I'm fine.
Now, if there's people out there who have been watching, they have questions or whatever, is there a number that you can give where they can give a call and get information without an obligation or anything, right?
No obligation, no
Okay.
contribution, they're free services.
Right.
Actually, we welcome calls and would like to provide people with some information, and if we can't provide help, we do a good job of referring them to someone who can. We have an 800 number. It's 1-877-402-2299.
Okay. And should they ask for anybody in particular, or just anybody who picks up? Because
no, that's our main line, where we have a paralegal,
and then you got your
who
20.
handles the
Okay.
calls. Right.
Sort of like trickles down to the 20.
They will refer the case, if it's something we're accepting, they would refer to the appropriate paralegal or attorney.
Yeah, for that area.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Exactly.
And how, I think we already covered this, but I already forgot. How geographically are your 20 people?
Well, we have paralegals who are divided by regions throughout the state. So the paralegals cover, and they're supervised by attorneys.
So like 6 sub-offices, would you say? Or?
Well, there's actually more than that. They'll go out to places like the social club I mentioned up in Torrington, the Primetime House. They may go there every other week and spend another day at another, outpatient site, and then go inpatient, for a couple of days a week. We actually, under our state funding, we're obligated to spend a specific number of days a week at the state facilities. But the staff will go out to soup kitchens and other places just to make sure people sort of know about their rights and hear about them. That's probably the hardest thing, because...
Do you visit the hospitals too, the regular hospitals?
Not so often, the private hospitals, because there's another state agency, the Office of Protection and Advocacy,
I see,
that actually covers the private hospitals.
Okay, so it's the state hospitals.
So we tend to focus on the state.
And the people who are connected with the state hospital that may be out in housing have issues or whatever.
Right.
All right.
People who are clients of the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services.
Okay, so maybe we can go over some cases, because we still have a little time, and that way we can cover,
Okay.
Some interesting cases that you've had as of late. Were there any kind of variations you want to talk about? Yeah, obviously you can't talk about an individual, John, James, or whatever, but if you can talk a little bit about some of the things you've intervened on. I know we had one issue before that we talked about.
But the restraints and seclusion. Right. We've actually had, I'm not thinking of a particular case right now, but sometimes we get involved in situations where the clients are being, as I mentioned earlier, they're being held in the hospital beyond the time they need hospital level of care. We don't actually represent the clients in probate court because they get a court-appointed attorney. But very often we've been working with that person in the community, and we know that person, we know the mental health system, we know the meds. And just recently we intervened in a case where a young adult was just being held far too long at Cedar Crest Hospital without good cause, and we've been able to intervene and have that person discharged. One of the problems, and this is very true of young adults, is there are a lot of young adults who are being transferred from, at age 18, they may move from Department of Children and Families to Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, or DEMAS. And DEMAS doesn't really have enough appropriate housing for young adults. Initially, in fact, they started treating them more like a 30 or 40-year-old person, which anybody who knows a young adult knows that's not what's going on here. So they've been, again, trying to play catch-up and develop programming for these young adults. And unfortunately, a lot of them have been placed at Cedar Crest Hospital really unnecessarily. If we'd had the right kind of programming and housing for them in the community, that's where they should be. It's better for them, and again, it's better for the taxpayers. So we are intervening on some of those cases when we can.
Now you have federal grants, state grants.
State grants and private foundations, right.
Okay, private foundations. So,
right.
How much work do you actually do? Does everybody get involved in fundraising?
In the fundraising?
Or is it just the executive director and staff?
The executive director and the administrative staff. We do a lot of the grant writing, grant reporting, all those sorts of things. Unfortunately for the line staff, they have to produce a lot of the reports that we have to submit, which, as in any job, nobody likes the paperwork.
No.
But it goes with the territory. You want the money, you've got to write the report. So
that might be 2 days out of 5, but you got to do it.
You definitely have to do it.
Okay. So it's not like you have a golf tournament or anything like that?
No, we don't do a lot of the expansive fundraising. We really are very targeted in what we do. We're not looking to build a huge empire, but right now, because of the economy, some of those private foundation funds have been cut back, and so that's been problematic for our program.
I think any social service agency has been feeling it, because people...
very much so.
Well, I used to give $50, but I'm not going to give. Maybe you get 5, or I don't know. Maybe pass me this year. You got a lot of people.
It's a difficult
that are
time.
Doing that. It's tougher and tougher to get people, because I'm involved in fundraising with a number of groups, and that's what I've been getting. People cutting down, or so I can imagine.
The foundations, as you probably know, have been trying not to cut back too much because they know this is a time of greatest need. But
then their portfolio's down.
Exactly.
So if they give too much out, versus what they got in the kitty, their income's going to drop off, and so they sometimes are forced to slash, even if it's 15% or whatever, especially since if they've gone down 35% on their portfolio. But I think as of late the market's been doing better, so maybe it's not as dramatic as it was.
Well, I know a lot of the nonprofits, including ourselves, have had to do things like free salaries, have people make higher contributions to health benefits, just like they're doing with the state employees.
And have people volunteer, or just that, that's happened in some places. The people are actually working for ZIP for a while, and then
we haven't gotten there yet.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, thank goodness.
It's tough to pay the rent with, or the mortgage with that kind of arrangement.
Exactly.
Okay, what can you tell us? Do you have? What can you tell us about your staff, as opposed to Are there any people that have come in from, let's say, they were a trial lawyer and had it with the corporate world?
Actually, yeah.
Or whatever. Okay.
We have actually one of
without mentioning a specific name.
Oh, no, one of our staff attorneys actually had worked for years with a private law firm. I think spent over 20 years with one of the larger private law firms located in Hartford, and I was very fortunate to meet her through another attorney who was a mutual friend. And it just turned out that we had a position open out, and it worked out perfectly.
So the burnout was at the right time?
It really takes, I have to say, a very special kind of person to do this kind of work. We're at the intersection of law and medicine. Right. And while we're obviously not clinical experts, you have to understand the medical implications of things like the medications or other kinds of health-related issues. So it can be very interesting, but it's also very challenging. And one of the things I marvel at are the staff who, I have one paralegal who's been there, well, since the program began. And you have to keep, I hope people don't take this the wrong way, but you have to keep that level of passion and outrage, because sometimes you do work for too long and you start to become immune.
Yeah, you're almost like working for the bank or whatever.
Right, yeah. And you really need to be able, not be disrespectful, not be outrageous, but you also have to have that combination of passion and hope. And it just amazes me that I work with a tremendous group of people. I can't tell you, I just get so much energy from just working with them.
Well, they still have the the fire in the belly.
Exactly.
We're here to do good. I guess that's the key. We're here to do good, as opposed to some people just put in other jobs or put money in their pocket and they're not really thinking about the public good.
And I do need to say that sometimes the staff, you can understand why sometimes they think that we are criticizing them or they take offense. We're there to protect the individual rights, and to be honest, sometimes the state people can't always respect those rights because they're understaffed. They don't have the resources they need to do it, as I was saying earlier. They don't have the housing to be able to discharge people in a timely manner. It's not a criticism of them, it's the system, but I think sometimes they are defensive about that. Understandably so, but it's not directed at an individual. I mean, it's directed at protecting our clients' rights.
Now, how much education do your counselors or, do they get involved with, as far as trying to, go halfway to interacting with the medical community about cases, because you have to have a little bit of like you said, a little bit of knowledge as to, how they're getting abused. How do you know it's that a restraint shouldn't be on for more than an hour as opposed to 5 hours or whatever?
Well, there's actually two elements of that. One is we do ongoing in-service training for the staff, so we'll have people come in and explain about medications. Although our job is not necessarily to second-guess a medication, our job is to say, look, there are certain procedures you're supposed to do. If I want for you to have a medication, I'm supposed to discuss it with you as a doctor and go through the pros and cons, just like they would with anyone else. Unfortunately, for people with mental illness, there has been this presumption that you can just be told what's good for you when you do it, or else. So
they're sort of waving to me, which is saying we're almost out of time.
Okay.
Can you give that number one more time?
I'd be happy to. It's 1-877-402-2299.
I want to thank you for coming on the show.
I want to thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
I want to thank the viewers for tuning in for Community Forum. See you next week, same time, same station. I'm sure we'll have another interesting program. Good night for now, and we'll see you then.